Hi everyone, welcome to the Athletic Skills Podcast, and today I've got Luke Robinson on with me. So Luke is a lecturer for the PGA and a strength and conditioning coach, specialising in golf. So Luke, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Isaac. Thank you.
So Luke, we haven't really had many golf specialist people on this podcast, so it'd be good to hear a little bit about your journey and about to where you are now, and also some of the research you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, so I guess with golf, first of all, I was quite lucky in the sense that my dad and my uncle are both pros. Always been playing golf from really young age, and I guess as I progressed through life, I always took a bit of an interest in like the physical performance side of things. Always enjoyed like going to the gym, typical young fella in school. Like really enjoyed PE, and then as I got to 17, 18, just got a couple of injuries. Typically, would have always been playing either golf or Gaelic football back home in Ireland. And yeah, a couple of injuries led me down the route of obviously trying to do some rehabilitation of myself and dived into it from there. And then I went to university at the University of Stirling for 4 years and then graduated to the University of Limerick to study physical education teaching, where I taught then professionally for 2 years. So within them 2 years, obviously I was carrying out my role as a PE teacher, but alongside that I was doing some strength and conditioning work with the teams within the school, and within them 2 years got qualified as a strength and conditioning coach as well. Got a little bit of experience working with general population as well as athletes, which I think was really beneficial to me, to be honest. I guess at the time I was a little bit naive and just said I always wanted to be working with elite athletes, but I think you have to do your time on the floor in the gym and working with general population. And then I guess the conversation came around where I was really lucky that I bumped into my now supervisor, Dr. Chris Bishop, at Middlesex University and the London Sport Institute. And I actually approached Chris. And I approached Chris with an idea around potential research in golf. And yeah, we just had a couple of conversations with Chris and Anthony Turner and Dan Coughlin as well, who's the head of sports science on the DP World Tour in England Golf. And just developed this research idea that turned into my PhD. And again, alongside that, I developed my own practice, moving from general population and worked with some GA athletes in Donegal GA, underage athletes. And now I moved through solely working with golfers, both elite amateur and some tour professionals. So that's where I'm really up to today. And as you said, I'm also a lecturer for the PGA as well. So trying to balance all three between lecturing for the PGA, my own kind of S&C private work, and then research as well. So it's a nice balance, but it brings around its own difficulties as well.
I'd just be interested to get your thoughts, especially having been within golf quite a bit, in terms of where strength and conditioning is at. In terms of the sport, is it developing at the moment in terms of, and I know, as you mentioned before when we chatted off this, around there's some myths out there as well. So yeah, it'd be good to hear where you think strength and conditioning is at in terms of golf.
Yeah, I think it's as you said, it's definitely developing. I said this at a conference last year in Loughborough. I think if you type in golf fitness to YouTube or you type in golf fitness to Instagram, it becomes an interesting place where if you didn't really know what you're doing, or if you didn't have like experience in the field of S&C or physical preparation, you would just get totally lost because there's so much stuff, such a wide variety of exercises and people doing it and how to do certain exercises and so on. And I think the problem being is that golf hasn't had a traditional relationship with physical preparation and strength and conditioning, like maybe sports like rugby has, or maybe other contact sports. Golf hasn't had that. But it is certainly developing, and I think it's down to guys, like I said, Dan Coughlin on tour, Simon Brearley, Will Whalen, these guys that are actually on the floor with players, not always elite players. They work with national squads as well, and amateurs that are underneath the kind of the professional game. And also guys, like I said, like my own supervisor, Chris Bishop and Anthony Turner, who are doing research within golf. It's continually developing, but I think it's probably a long way behind other sports. I think what we're also trying to do is, be it with my own research in female golf, and there's another PhD student doing in male golf, we're trying to understand what best practice looks like. And we're trying to move away from mimicking the golf swing and doing all these kind of rotational exercises and stand and bogey balls and stuff like that, to what we're really understanding, where the the relationships lie between physical characteristics and golf performance metrics. I think that I've always said this. I think at the start of my PhD, I always said to myself that once I do 3 or 4 years, I'll have it all figured out and I'll be ready to go. But I guess the exciting thing is it's the first step, really, for me in female golf. And for, as I said, there's another PhD student doing it in male golf. Yeah, I think that's where golf is in terms of physical preparation and S&C.
And you mentioned you're doing quite a bit of research at the moment and with your PhD and stuff. So what are you currently looking into at the moment?
At the moment, working with 6 golfers on an individual kind of case by case basis. So typically research that's went on before myself has been a one size fits all generic S&C programs. And also some of the methods that are questionable in terms of they went down the route of kind of golf specific or maybe some other ways as well. But within my own research, so what we done is we looked at players on a case by case basis. So where we profile them using force plates, so we can see where they're at in terms of metrics like peak force or their ballistic qualities as well. And we'll develop that. We'll develop a training program specifically for them. I think one of the maybe just going back to myths as well links into this is what I'm about to say is that I think we really need to be careful with golf and strength and conditioning in the sense that golf's obviously an individual sport. And I think with that, you need to appreciate that it requires an individual level of analysis. Providing a generic S&C program or training program for a group of players isn't really going to, generic programs will probably produce generic results, whereby if you're going to individualize it, then you're probably going to see the best results in terms of improving physical characteristics and also improving golf performance metrics as well. So that's where we're at, and understanding with the 6 players, 3 of them are elite amateurs and 3 of them are professional golfers. 2 of the 3 professionals have played on the Ladies European Tour, so really high level players. So we can do quite a few things with that whenever we get the data analyzed in terms of making comparisons as well. But what's gone before that, I guess at the very start of the PhD, we ran a meta-analysis in terms of understanding the literature that's available in female golf specifically, of which there wasn't much. And then we ran 2 survey studies, so one within elite amateurs and one within Ladies European Tour players, and understanding the practices and perceptions in terms of what perceptions players have of strength and conditioning, what did they believe that they can get from strength and conditioning, and what are the potential barriers for them in engaging in strength and conditioning, or maybe touching that later on. And then we looked at the physical associations between, or sorry, the physical characteristics and the associations between those physical characteristics and golf performance again in both elite amateur and tour professional players, which then led up to where I am now in the case series stuff. So yeah, that's how the last basically 3 years has looked in terms of my research.
And you mentioned at the start of you just mentioned earlier on around the importance of individualization. Is that quite easy, or is that easy to do in terms of like with golfers, maybe compared to team sports, and how? And you mentioned around the testing as well, in terms of how that could really help drive in terms of the individualization. Is that the same for amateur athletes as well as the higher level ones?
Um, it can be difficult because a lot of this stuff depends on the facilities available to you. So I've been lucky enough that I've had access to force plates now. Again, obviously force plates are like gold standard in terms of physically testing an athlete, but there's other stuff out there you can use. So for example, the Jump Lab app is really useful and really accessible. Not that expensive to use. You can just download it on your iPhone and use that. But it depends the amount of players you're working with. It depends the amount of time you have with the player as well. So are you going to work with them on a 4-week basis where obviously the difference you can make is not that much? Or are you going to work with them on a yearly basis? So it really depends. And obviously the more players you're working with, the more time consuming it becomes. But I think it's important to carry out some sort of individualized approach with the players, even if it's a sense of having a conversation with them. I have a couple of players and they're quite tall. So, and some of them might experience some lower back pain. So again, it's even though you're trying to improve the same outcome measures in terms of upper body strength and lower body strength and power, they can be achieved in different ways. So for a taller athlete, you might use something like a rack squat in comparison to a full depth squat, where that's where they can maybe experience a little bit of back pain. So something like even having a conversation and just using your eyes as a coach can be useful. But again, if you've got facilities there, such as force plates, that can be great as well.
And then how important would you say working with a player in terms of that education process to get their buy-in, especially where golf is at in terms of the S&C? So as you're working through this individualized process in terms of talking to them and how that might transfer for an exercise in the gym to actual their performance on the course.
Yeah, I think the key word across my whole PhD, to be honest, is that word education, and trying to communicate with players and also swing coaches in terms of what S&C can provide for players in golf. If they believe what you're doing with them is going to work, the buy-in is likely going to be there. And for example, I'll give you some example from some of the answers that we got from the surveys. So like this was both from amateurs and professionals. It was the same across both populations. Was that a lot of players felt that, or not felt that, a lot of players engage in strength and conditioning during the off season, and they were probably just they'd be really engaged, they'd be pounding the gym, and then all of a sudden in season comes and all they will do is stretch, or the focus will just be on playing golf. Now, I think as a strength and conditioning coach, I'm not being narrow minded about this. They're golfers at the end of the day. Obviously, golf takes priority 100%. But S&C is such a low hanging fruit for golfers in season where they can, if they carried out one session a week, 1 or 2 sessions a week, they would easily maintain the physical characteristics that they've built up in the off season. And that was definitely one that was easy to see across both samples within the survey. And the second, so when we speak about education and like what S&C can do for a golfer, a really useful resource that I always lean on, and actually I show this to players, is it's called the probability of performance impact. So it was designed by Simon Brearley and Dan Kaufman. As I said, Dan's obviously one of my supervisors, and Simon, sorry, is one of the S&C coaches on tour, where they created like a pyramid structure where they explain the probability of performance, essentially demonstrating the impact S&C can have for golf. And what they explain is that, I guess, the biggest impact S&C can have for golfers is availability. So making sure that players are healthy and injury free, and they have a long careers, they have longevity, they're prepared for a long week and a long career. So I think that's really important. That's one thing that I've learned from Dan and Chris, and from Simon and all these guys, that being available and being injury free has to be number one, and it's number one in the sense of what S&C can provide for players. And then moving up the pyramid, you've got readiness, in the sense that the player is ready to go and ready to play that week. One of the things I didn't appreciate before working with some players that travel a lot is the effect that travel has on the body, and the little niggles that players can pick up because of long travel times. So really dealing with jet lag and travel is an important component of elite level golf. And then really up from readiness, you're talking about different movement strategies where you're essentially where the body can deal with the forces that is going through the body when they swing the golf club. I guess links with resilience and robustness. And again, movement strategies in terms of moving quicker, in terms of having higher club head speed. And then really at the top of the pyramid is moving in a way that facilitates your coaching direction, working with working with a swing coach, and helping in delivering the club effectively at impact. Really, what essence can have a big impact on is availability. And then, as I said, moving through the pyramid up towards what can have less an impact on is actual technical changes within the swing. But again, that can come with communication with the swing coach.
And does that change in terms of percentage of, let's say, the availability versus the performance aspect? Does that change in terms of whether that's you in a competition or whether you're out of competition, in terms of how much time you might spend on each?
I don't think so. I think obviously you want to be available all year, right? But the off season is a really important time for players to maybe make some swing changes, make some physical changes. So there's still, even though they're off season, again, I would question if there is an off season on some of the tours because they go on that long. But you still need to be making some sort of change or progressing in some capacity in the off season. So I think being available all year round is really, really important. Yeah.
And with a busy schedule that golfers naturally go through with their, especially on tour, how do they actually look to fit the physical aspect in that? Is that microdose throughout the week? Is that before they go out on the course? So how do they fit through a busy schedule?
Yeah, and again, this is one area that came up a lot within the surveys. Again, actually, was how they actually have time to fit fit S&C in during a competition week, because some players, again, they have long travel times. They have to play a practice round. They have to spend some time in the range. They might have media duties and stuff like that as well. So all of a sudden, a week actually becomes really shortened, and it's got its own pressures as well. I think one thing, again, going back to that term education, is, you know, getting the point across to players that S&C doesn't have to be this like massive 60, 75 minutes workout where you're sweating and you have DOMs the next day and you can't move the next day. It doesn't have to be that at all. And microdosing, as you said, microdosing S&C across the week is a really useful tool, in the sense that if you think about it logically, rather than doing two massive 1 hour sessions, say, if it's microdosed across the week 4 times from Monday to Sunday, whatever way they can fit it in, you're actually probably getting the same, if not more, volume in across them smaller sessions. Plus, you're reducing the risk of DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, which obviously golfers are afraid of and they don't want, which is fair. It's really important to get that across to players, that they can do a 25 minutes gym session on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. And that's totally fine. Again, getting the volume in. So like during term weeks, for example, I would get like a classic example I would get a player to do is, and I was speaking with a player yesterday who's in South Africa, do some sort of dynamic warm up, ramp warm up, just get the heart rate up. Just my opinion on warm up is just feel better. Just go through the ramp warm up, feel better. Then it might be, I really like using like French contrast trains. So like a lift and a jump paired up. So it'd be like two sets of three of a hex bar deadlift. I would also raise the hex bar off the floor, so put plates underneath the hex bar. So two sets of three, paired up with a jump, maybe just a kind of movement jump or a banded jump. And then maybe 2 sets of 4 on a dumbbell push press paired up with some sort of a med ball slam or a med ball throw. And that could literally be 20, 25 minutes. I think you hit like upper body, lower body strength, lower body power, upper body strength, upper body power. And that's it. It can be as simple as that. I think S&C, not only in golf, probably across all sports, it can be overcomplicated. Again, just doing that and educating players that it can be that simple is probably going to get them to buy in more as well.
And you mentioned just there around you looking at developing some sort of strength and then some power in terms of a med ball throw or some sort of plyometric. Are these the big physical components that you're looking to focus on when you're working with these golfers, whether that's in or out? So strength and power. Is there anything else also you may be looking into?
Basically, as I said, anything I do within my own practice, I guess I feel really lucky that I get to be a practitioner and I'm involved in research as well. So I can take nuggets from both and try and apply it to both aspects. But what I always try and do as an S&C coach is apply best practice to the actual practice. Yeah, it is essentially trying to improve upper body, lower body strength and power. And again, it can be really, you can get as complicated as you like, but if you can focus on them 4 key areas, again, what we're trying to do essentially with golfers is trying to improve force production capabilities. And also, I would say some mobility around the thoracic spine and hips as well. Obviously, there's links to like the X factor stretch at the top of the backswing, which is the separation between the hips and the thoracic spine. So that can help as well. But typically, yeah, that's all we're looking to do is improve them physical capacities. But again, maybe creating a bit of a blanket approach here. It very much depends on the individual in front of you. With the 6 players that I'm working with at the minute within my PhD, again, lucky enough, we have the 4 splits, so we can see where they're potentially stronger or where they're deficient in. So we can really hone in on where we need to go after with their programming. So again, that comes back to the individualized approach with golfers.
I'm just curious, I just thought now, especially with golf and the action that is always very one-sided, always doing, do you see a lot of asymmetries when you're working with golfers? And you just mentioned using force plates there. Do you see some quite big differences?
You do see asymmetries, yeah. Again, that's the beauty of force plates. You do see asymmetries, absolutely. But if there was potential of looking at this actually with a colleague of mine within the PG as well, Lewis Clark, at the start of the year. But we actually looked at the data that I had from LET, and there was no real significant differences between asymmetries and, say, club head speed, ball speed, carry distance. But I think you will get asymmetries in every athlete you look at, really. So it's not something that we really carried on with, to be honest. But yeah, you do see them.
And you just mentioned there club head speed and ball carry distance and things. Are they the metrics that you focus on when you're working with your athletes in terms of the testing and then some of the research stuff that you're doing as well?
I think carry or clubhead speed, sorry, is a buzzword within golf in S&C at the minute. But it's probably important to look at clubhead speed, ball speed, carry distance, and also smash factor as well in terms of how efficiently they're the golfer is delivering the club, because that can also be maybe an indicator of what level of golf you're at. So if you're looking at it, I remember looking at a paper who did, showed that the carry distance was quite low and the smash factor was quite low, which would indicate that they're working with a higher handicap golfer. So it really depends on the population you're looking at. But yeah, it's probably important to look at those four metrics as a whole rather than solely looking at one area of club head speed.
And you mentioned how maybe club head speed is quite a big theme at the moment. And maybe if you Googled on, you went on Instagram and you went on golf exercises, for example, you might find some exercises that trying to replicate the a club swing, for example, or trying to be golf specific. So what's the difference in terms of just the general based exercise in terms of getting strength and power compared to maybe some of the exercises you might be seeing online that are quite funky, would you say?
Yeah, look, again, I would definitely be a big believer in just traditional resistance training, traditional compound, heavy lifting. So obviously what I'm speaking about there is squat, deadlift, bench, a rowing variation, and overhead, maybe a pressing variation, sorry. But they're your kind of five, maybe bread and butters in terms of developing the physical capacities that I spoke about earlier on. Now, what I always say is I don't want people to think that all golfers have to do is squat, deadlift, bench, row, and press. Okay, that's not the case at all. Again, it goes back to the individualized approach. But you can certainly use the traditional resistance training to improve the capacities that I've spoke about. But again, it depends. There's no point if you're working with a player who can squat 1.5 or 2 times their body weight, you have to look at the cost benefit of going any heavier than that. So you're likely better off trying to get them on force, but looking, are they deficient over different time points of where they're producing force. And what we look at is 100 milliseconds and 200 milliseconds. And can they improve their physical capacities that way in terms of their ballistic qualities? But again, even trying to improve their ballistic qualities, be looking at some loaded jumps, some throws. That's the route we'd be going down there. Again, in terms of the myths, as I said, if you see a player using some bands on a bogey ball, or it becomes this kind of golf specific thing, there's no way that can create enough stress on the muscle tissue to create adaptation. That's where you really have to question how are they improving their force production capabilities by using that. Now, again, there might be a place for that. I'm not like talking down anybody that has done that or coaches that do that, not at all, because there may be a place for that in terms of like rehabilitation or kind of movement quality. But if you're solely looking at trying to improve golf performance metrics, golf shot data, physical characteristics, I think traditional resistance training is probably the low hanging fruit or the best bang for your buck for golf and athletes.
And I think you get that across different sports as well in terms of training has to be sport specific, has to I saw a video the other day around it was a bobsleigh athlete and what they actually do. And obviously they're in the gym, they're not going to train like they do in the
Yeah.
bobsleigh, and they're doing a lot of plyometrics and things like that. And then they get obviously great outcomes in their sport. So it just shows that your training doesn't have to necessarily look like the sport you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And like, I know Rory, the European Tour Performance Institute, released a video of Rory, it's probably a couple of years ago now in Dubai. And like the stuff he was doing, and Rory, we all know, or anybody within golf circles know, that Rory's superb athlete, probably the longest player in the world or one of them. And like, I think all he done was the hex bar deadlift, a box jump, and then it was like an incline dumbbell chest press and med ball slam. Now, I know that's all they released, but again, it was nothing crazy or out of the ordinary. It was just your traditional lifting. And again, that probably paints a picture in terms of Rory, one of the best athletes in the world. Probably tells us some story. Yeah.
And when you're really focusing on strength and then power with these elite athletes, I'm sure that'll transfer down to the amateur athletes as well in terms of their health and thinking about the availability, because some general strength exercise for them, maybe not going as heavy as or as complex as the elite level people, but those are really important just for general health as well for those
Yeah,
golfers.
no, 100%, 100%. I'm a big believer of, as I said, really going back to Simon and Dad's probability of performance. Big believer of health first, performance second. And think, as I said, clubhead speed has become this buzzword within golf and S&C, and it can be very easy to become narrow-minded around how we can improve clubhead speed. So I'll give you an example. I was working at an event last year. It was an underage event. And this girl's father came up to me. I was working in the gym. This girl's father came up to me and said that she was falling a long way behind her peers in terms of distance. So I had a conversation with him and I was asking what kind of methods are you trying to improve her clubhead speed and her distance. And he said, got her like speed sticks and she's doing loads of speed training with her driver and she's hitting like loads of balls before and after. And I was like, was she doing any resistance training? And he said, no, it's just all speed training. I think it makes more sense. And and he actually, funny enough, he also said that she's got a little bit of a sore back as well. So you'd have to question that, are some people missing the bigger picture in terms of health is should be one and then build performance on top of health. So for example, that girl has probably just spiked the volume way too much in terms of the amount of golf balls it's hit. So if you're using a driver, typically it's like 7,000 newtons of compression force going through the spine. And you do that 100 times, maybe 50 before, 50 after, as well as playing golf. It's a lot of force going through the body. And then if the body isn't robust or resilient enough to handle that, that's where sore backs and sore wrists and sore necks can come from. So I think it's, as I said, it's really important to prioritize health and then build performance through that.
And then one important factor, I'm sure, towards the health side is actually warming up prior to playing. So, what
Yep.
sort of strategies would you recommend a coach to when they're working with their athletes or their golfers in terms of that warm up prep? And you mentioned how a big one for you is actually just feeling better. Is that how you
Yep.
base your warm-ups around?
Yeah. Warm ups to me what actually infuriated me at the start because I couldn't actually pinpoint one warm up that worked all the time. Whereby, as we said earlier, you try and improve upper body strength. You want to do a bench press, or you want to do a bent over row or whatever, or you want to improve lower body strength to do a squat or deadlift or whatever. But when it came to warm ups, it was so individualized, and some players liked a certain warm up, some players didn't like a certain warm up, and it becomes almost a bit of a process of trying to figure out what works best. But I would say there isn't a one size fits all warm ups. Again, as you said, I'm a big believer in just feeling better after the warm up, especially during competition week. And probably a lot of that is just trial and error, just trying to figure out what makes the athlete feel better. Typically, though, what will stay the same is two things will stay the same. It'll be dynamic. The warm up will be dynamic in nature, and I'll still always follow the ramp protocol in some capacity. So I'll always be raise the heart rate, activate, and mobilize, and then potentiate. So what that might look like is raise the heart rate. You can do whatever we want. It could be a treadmill, a rower, hop on the bike. And then the activation and mobilization process, just try and really move through some shapes and just feel better. Typically, trying to maybe mobilize or open out the hips and lower back. Again, going down the individual thing again, maybe working on individual weaknesses. So a player, again, that I'm working with has experienced a little bit of neck pain recently. Working on some banded extension and flexion in their neck has really helped. Just popping that into a warm up for a few minutes has helped. And then potentiation could be like lifting or throwing something. It depends on their training history and training age as well with that one. And then obviously what we shouldn't really forget about is the golf stuff. But typically what a player will do is they'll go after the gym, they'll go to the putting green, hit some putts and chips, and then they'll move through the bag in terms of wedges the whole way up to a driver, then go back to the putting green, and then they're back on the first tee again. Again, it's trial and error, but once a player has a couple of years under the belt in terms of their training age, they'll know what works best for them. And yes, again, as I said, just trying to feel a little bit better, open out the key areas, hips, lower back, just make sure, again, key areas for injury as well as the wrist, and yeah, just getting them ready to play.
And that just goes back to your point around the individualization, around not trying to blanket everyone in the same way.
Yep,
Like you mentioned, around that player that had that neck issue compared to maybe
yep,
someone that maybe has limitations in their hips or their ankles. There might be different areas that people have
yep,
focus on there.
yep, 100%, 100%. Maybe just one thing I'll add in here is what we do within the PGA, and again, my colleague Lewis Clark does this within sports science. Lewis is also a doctorate student as well, where or where he carries out an experiment with students where he separates the group into a static warm-up group and a ramp warm-up group, and they'll measure club head speed before and after. And typically you'll always see the ramp group having a higher club head speed post testing. Now I know that isn't high level research at all, but it typically becomes a little bit of an eye opener for students in terms of static stretching probably isn't best practice, definitely isn't best practice. And you should be going down the route of a ramp warm up.
And I know one thing you mentioned prior was around a lot of people, like you mentioned there, around the static stretching. A lot of people focus on the flexibility aspect and maybe forget about the strength and the power aspect as well. Is that something you maybe see that people put into the program is prioritize more flexibility than the actual strength work?
Definitely in season, definitely is. And as I've had a little bit more exposure to seeing female golfers within competitive periods, definitely in season, definitely. You'll go into a gym sometimes and all you'll see out is the bands, foam rollers, the like activation bands for their glutes. And it's something that probably needs to be educated on in terms of, I'm not talking down flexibility or mobility at all. It has its place, of course it does. But in terms of, again, this is probably a conversation for another day, but in terms of microdosing S&C or almost like acting as a primer before they go out to play, probably not going to do that much. But again, if they have an issue in their, as you said, in their hips or ankle or lower back, that's obviously totally fine. But in terms of actually exciting the nervous system and getting ready to play, it's probably not the low hanging fruit.
And that was actually something within cricket when I was working in that area around the primary aspect, was actually introducing some sort of power based exercise or some sort of strength based exercise. And that took time to get buy-in. Took that mixed approach where your players might you like using the foam rollers and the bands or whatever to actually feel
Yeah.
like they're activating themselves. But then if you maybe introduce something fun like a medicine ball throw, just maybe try this in one of your sessions, then that's how I got buy-in in terms of that priming aspect. And I'm sure that's something that you were doing as well.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well that you go into it again, that event that I mentioned earlier on, where it was all underage athletes. And it's funny that you see the different countries and you see the different S&C philosophies as they come in. England Golf has a really world-class program, and there's some world-class practitioners within England Golf. And you see the girls come in and the boys come in, and they're doing some sort of lifting, they're doing some sort of jumping, they're doing some sort of throwing. And then you have other countries come in and it's not so good, where maybe it's just they might lie on the foam roller and scroll on their phone, or they might do something that looks golfy and then they're in and out the gym in 10 minutes. So it's interesting that you see the kind of philosophies for different countries, and then you go on to tour and the philosophies are still there with the players that are coming in. So yeah, it's interesting.
So let's just go full circle and come back to your research and some of the stuff you're doing. And I know you mentioned around you're doing some work with what the difference is between male and female golfers. Just want to expand a little bit on that in terms of what you might be seeing within your research on that.
I'm not researching that specifically. I'm solely on female, and there's another PhD student who's doing male. But typically within male and female, I think whenever I speak to people and says I'm solely in female golf, one of the first questions that will always come is, oh, what's the difference between male and female when it comes to golf performance? And I think, to be honest, when we look at trying to develop strong, powerful, robust golfer, the physical qualities are the exact same. What we're trying to develop, what we're trying to improve. What we need to be careful of is the physiological differences. So typically males, again, I'm kind of putting the blanket approach to this. Typically males are taller. Typically males possess more muscle mass. And obviously that has positive implications for kind of male versus female in terms of how far they can hit the ball, right? Another thing you need to be really wary of is the menstrual cycle within female golfers and how that affects physical performance and how that affects how they go around potentially a tournament week. Again, that training can be altered around that as well. But again, that comes back to just having open communication with players, like breaking down that barrier between S&C coach and player, and also swing coach to S&C coach, if there is a barrier there between those areas of the team. So yeah, as I said, like the physical characteristics won't change in terms of what we're trying to develop. It's just taking into consideration those physiological differences in terms of anthropometry.
And that was the same when I was working in women's sport as well, in terms of, I'd say probably 90% of the program was same as across the board. Maybe some aspects was turns around the education or getting by, how you communicate with those athletes might be slightly different as well. And like you mentioned, the menstrual cycle and the physiological characteristics are a big factor in terms of some of the decisions you might make as well in terms of your training.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you're obviously doing a lot of research. So is there any way that people can keep an eye out, see what your research or how that has been going at the moment? And also anything else that that's going on with yourself, or if anyone's just got any questions that they want to ask off the back of this. So if there's any way people can get in touch with you.
No worries. Just LinkedIn as normal. My Twitter handle is Luke Robinson 70, and then my Instagram is @_science. If anybody wants to reach out and have a discussion, no problem at all. In terms of research, over the last 2.5 years, we've published 5 papers within female golf and S&C, and hopefully might be a few more coming this year. And also both within my Twitter and my Instagram, there's one video from the Ladies European Tour, which kind of shows what I've done in terms of testing it was the Ladies Irish Open last year and how we collected that data. And there's some players speaking there as well as the head of S&C on the LEP. So it's a nice video.
Now, I'll put a link for that for people that want to have a watch. And I presume your research papers are open access as well for people to have a look at.
Research papers are all open access. Yeah.
Perfect. Luke, thank you very much for joining. It's been great to have a chat with someone different, a different sport to I've chatted about previously on this podcast. So some great insights there. So thank you very much for coming on.
No problem at all, Isaac. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Luke.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Athletic Skills Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it helpful in learning more about impacting your youth athletes' movement and physical development. If you did enjoy this episode, please take a moment to give us a subscribe and share to any other coaches or teachers that you think it may help. Also, if you have any feedback or topics that you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or on the email in the description. And we'll be more than happy to try and tackle those challenges you are facing as a sports coach or a PE teacher. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. I look forward to speaking to you soon.